Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where you meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast lovers. This is the 41st episode of the Shipping Podcast. I am going to introduce you to a woman with more than 40 years of experience from the maritime industry. So when everyone is talking about that there are no women in shipping, they're wrong. There are some outstanding women that we as women in my generation hold as role models. I can see that we are slowly coming into the role of being role models ourselves to the next generation of women and men. But this is really a role model for very many people. At the CMA in Connecticut, Stamford, New York, I met with the President and CEO of the Chamber of Shipping of America, Kathy Metcalf. She's also a member of the Vista USA, that is Women in Shipping and Trading Association. If you haven't heard about it, look it up. I promise you, you will find so many interesting people there. So, without further ado, this is Kathy Metcalf for you. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast.
Thank you.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Kathy Metcalf. I'm the president of the Chamber of Shipping of America, the U.S.-based ship owner association. We have a multitude of ship types across our member companies, U.S. flag and international non-U.S. flag trading ships, and it's a great industry to be in right now.
How did you start in shipping?
Shipping was not my original intention. As a young person, I wanted to be a medical doctor, and I had set my path forward into how I was going to get there, and not wanting to bankrupt my parents, I had considered one of the, at the time, 3 U.S. military academies, which I could attend for 4 years and then go to the Armed Forces Medical School, have a commitment, and then at some point in time move to the private sector. Unfortunately, the military academies were not yet accepting women. And I had the good fortune of my local senator, who is kind of a fairly well-known name now, Joe Biden, in his first term as a senator, called me in my college dorm and said, "Are you interested in the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy?" And I said, "What is that?" Which is yet another reason that shows we need to more publicize the industry and our training institutions to lead to good, proficient mariners. That weekend, my father and I traveled to the academy, and I instantly fell in love. And so I attended the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, graduated in 1978. I am in shipping by accident. Skill is important, but luck is almost as important.
So what is the military academy? Could you explain that to people who doesn't...
Right. There are, there are 4. There's the United States Military Academy at West Point. There's the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and the U.S. Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. At that time, they were all under the Department of Defense. And at the time, there was a law that prohibited women from entering into a billet that was a combat billet. The missions of all 4 of those academies were to develop young Americans to defend the country. So at that time, women could not conceivably be admitted for those reasons. The Merchant Marine Academy, however, was under the Department of Transportation, and they were not limited by those laws, which fortunately was changed within 2 years. And the first class of women went into the military academies in 1976, graduating in 1980.
So at what age do you enter into the academy? How old are you then?
Well, if you take a more traditional route out of high school, you would be 18 when you entered the academy and 22 when you graduated. In my case, I had 2 years of private college and then entered the academy at the age of 20 and graduated at 24.
And then what? What did you do after your academy?
Well, my goal, since I had been trained for that, was to sail for some period of time. I sailed for approximately 6 years for 2 different companies, while at the same time doing internships ashore with that company so that you could understand both the shore-based perspective of ship management and the ship-based side of operating a ship. So I sailed as deck officer approximately 6 years for 2 oil companies. And then my second oil company asked if I could come ashore and manage the health, environmental safety group, which I agreed to do. And it was shoreside from there.
And this was when?
This was in 1983, 84 timeframe. And I stayed in the Marine Department from 83 and 84, end of 83, beginning of 84 to about 1991. We were working HES. We were managing chemical carriers, 2 chemical carriers at the time, and a fleet of both U.S. and foreign flag tankers. During the period that I was there, I also went to law school during the evening as a tool, not to be a lawyer in a law firm, but as an analytical tool for developing regulations and legislation.
So did you stay with the health department, or did you?
No, in 1991, after I graduated from law school in 1988, there was some inclination on the part of my employer to get me into the law department. And I resisted and actually went to the corporate regulatory affairs department. And at the time was doing regulatory analysis for across the board downstream activities for the oil company. So that was not only the shipping side, it was the terminals, the refineries, and that sort of thing. In the late 1990s, well, I would say about 1994, I was asked to join the government relations group. And in that capacity, I was assigned 4 states out in the Midwest: Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, actually 5 states, and then Texas and Oklahoma. So I spent a very long time on the airplane during that job, but that's where I learned the art of government affairs and working with our internal clients and external folks, including state legislatures and state regulatory agencies.
It's so interesting, I think.
Well, it's sort of a willy-nilly. I'm lost in space, but I'm finding my way. The miracle of this, and I don't pretend to be evangelical here, but I think from the day you're born, God knows where you're going to end up through life. And life is about forks in the road and which ones you choose. And any choice of those thousands of forks in the road can obviously influence where you end up. In my case, I was very, very fortunate. And I thank God every day for it, that every job that I had from my time at the academy to my last job before I left the oil company as government affairs, I'm now using in my current job. So it was a collection of skill sets. Little did I know that I would be in a position to use them all in my current job. Again, good luck.
Thank you. So what do you do in your current job?
In my current job, I am the president of the Chamber of Shipping of America. As I mentioned earlier, we're a group of ship owners, charterers, and operators that operate multiple types of ships in U.S. flag and non-U.S. flag trade, so global trading, as well as the domestic Jones Act trade. What I and my very important colleague, Sean Klein, who's my number 2, do is, one, we try and advise our members on regulatory compliance for existing requirements. And when there are situational questions that come up about what do I need to do in this case, we try and provide that advice. But we also are more forward-looking. We try and look out into the future and see what programs are coming down the road that ship owners will have to comply. And that's at the International Maritime Association level, the international level, where we have the pleasure of going over on the International Chamber of Shipping delegation. It's also at the U.S. federal level, Congress, federal agencies such as EPA, Coast Guard, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the State Department. And then on occasion at the state level, Many times at state level is usually California because they are the more progressive of the environmental states in the United States. So what's coming in California will be coming elsewhere, but it's going to be about 10 years later. So it gives us a sort of a peek into the future.
I see. So you've been around in shipping for a while now.
Yes, I know that I look like I'm 20, but yes, I have been around since, I've been technically in shipping since 1974. So by my check, that's about 42 years. I know I don't look that old. I'm just joking. I started in shipping when my hair was brown. That's the way I say it.
So where do you see the biggest changes in shipping over those 40 years?
Well, I guess the first thing would be, of course, the increasing number of, I'll say minorities, but women have started to make some great inroads. One of my classmates her name is Nancy Wagner. She's a San Francisco bar pilot. Very, very proud of her. Other classmates as well that are in various parts of the business side of the industry, many with Harvard and Stanford MBAs. Some Kings Point women that I'm aware of, two in particular. One, the chief engineer, Mary Culnane, from the class of 80, who sailed as chief engineer for many, many years, now has a consulting firm. And one in particular, I believe, from the class of 80, Captain/Chief Engineer Carol Curtis, who, to the best of my knowledge, was the first dual graduate. And when I say dual graduate, normally at Kings Point, most people either go to the nautical science side or the marine engineering side, which would result in, respectively, a deck license or an engine license. Carol actually went through the dual program and came out with licenses, both deck and engine. And not only did she come out with a third engineer's license and a third mate's license, she now has a master's unlimited and a chief engineer's unlimited. So she raised both of those licenses up the two scales.
Wow.
Very, very, very competent. She should be here talking to you.
Yeah. Maybe next time.
I hope so.
Yeah, but otherwise, in shipping in general. So you see the women are, the minorities are.
I see that increasing, but from a regulatory and legislative perspective, what I see from, say, 30 years ago, where ships were regulated in areas to prevent catastrophes, to prevent deaths on ships, sinking ships, oil spills. It's now transitioned to areas that regulate the normal operations of ships. For example, air emissions. There's many, many efforts underway now, both at IMO and now in the agreement to Annex 6 of MARPOL, to implement air emissions reduction strategies on ships through the use of scrubbers to reduce NOx, for the use of low sulfur fuels to reduce the SOx emissions, as well as greenhouse gases, which is a very hot topic right now. And the industry as a whole and governments as a whole are working towards finding some sort of a structure where shipping can commit to reductions over time, both short-term, which short-term really isn't 2030 is when I talk about short-term, but 2050 is the long-term. And this, of course, is the result of many negotiations, most recently that occurred during COP21 in Paris. So the industry will be held to make some commitments. And the challenge right now is to figure out how those reductions can be made in an effective way, but in a commercially viable way that doesn't put shipping out of business.
And what do you see in the future? More than that?
More regulations. I see in the future, I think the key to the future now is we've come full circle around to catch up with some of the regulations in land-based industry. I think what we need to think about is how to think outside the old box. You know, there are still charter parties that have clauses from the days of the Phoenicians, thousands of years ago. And I think we need to constantly know that we need to help modernize our industry. We need to help promote innovation. And we need to be a good world citizen as far as the environmental operations go. We need to keep becoming greener and greener.
But we are, I think.
We are getting there, but, and we probably are there, but we're not there as much as we can go. Progressive improvement.
Because, I also live in a SECA area. I live in the heart of the SECA in the Baltic Sea, more or less, because I'm from Gothenburg. And everyone was very upset when those rules were introduced because it was not on a global base. But after the rules have been implemented, I've never seen so many new inventions. It's like living in an incubator. New things are invented all the time. As you were mentioning, the scrubber thing, we have, where I live, Stena is going for the methanol as an alternative fuel. EU is funding a lot of alternative fuel projects, trying to find out, is it LNG or is it something else that's going on? And I think every day I see new things people are telling me about, the green shipping.
I think it's awesome, and that's why I said we are green, but we're not the greenest we can be. We have to keep looking for new innovation. And when you think in the case of, say, the Baltic, a lot of the ship traffic is within the Baltic, with the ferries and ships that are actually committed to trading. So the infrastructure issue in the Baltic is a little more solvable than the global infrastructure issue. For example, one of our members, we are very, very proud to note, are making extreme progress on LNG ships. They're converting 2 of their ships. They're actually building an LNG fueling facility in Puget Sound, Washington. But if I have a ship that runs on LNG, if I'm in Puget Sound, that's great. But if I have to go to Asia and there's no LNG refueling facility, now what do I do? Which is why they're building dual fuel ships at this point in time. Ultimately, when the world's infrastructure catches up with the great ideas, we may be able to go completely to that. But we have to know that the infrastructure has got to build before there can be reliability of international shipping with new ways to power.
And there are people argue that LNG is still a fossil fuel. So maybe it's not LNG after all.
It could be a biofuel. It could be wind. It's still hard for me to envision a vessel operating efficiently on wind because we all know, I'm not a sailor, but we all know that with wind, it doesn't always blow the direction in which you want to go. So you've got to have some way to control your forward movement. But I don't think we should disregard any new ideas. We need to look forward.
We are often looked upon as the invisible industry.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on how we could become more visible?
Well, I've been asked that question a number of times. And back in the 1970s and 1980s, I believe, there was a senior citizen woman that advertised for Burger King. And the phrase was, "Where's the beef?" Well, I tell that story because I think the industry needs a "where's the beef" kind of campaign. We need something that we can put on general television, social media probably is a great opportunity. But we need a Madison Avenue ad campaign for this industry in general, so that we can communicate, say in my country, to people in Iowa that never see a large ocean-going ship, how much of what they have in their house comes to them on ships and ultimately railed or trucked in, but it's still on ships. And I've got to say, many people have seen the comparisons. Shipping is far and away the cleanest, most efficient transportation per ton mile when compared to airline, trucks, and rails. So it's environmentally friendly as well as very effective in moving huge percentages, probably 90-95% of the world's trade. That may be a little high, let's say 85.
Yeah, but still, I think that we have a tendency to talk to each other because
Indeed.
We know shipping and we are in the same, and we speak the same language more or less. And so we need to speak to the other ones who doesn't have got the bug yet. Yes,
there's no question. A lot of it has to do, I think, with, over the last 10 to 15 years, shipping has come to understand that they're part of a bigger universe called the logistics chain. And while most public or most private citizens in this country understand that they go to Walmart and they see Walmart trucks on the road, much like the shipping industry didn't really appreciate for long, that those trucks are part of a very long logistics chain that starts from the point of manufacture, that goes to a truck, that goes to a train, that goes to a ship, that goes back to a rail. And if somehow we can promote that logistics chain, it's helpful to all the transportation modes that are involved as far as elevating the public profile of that. How to do it? I don't know. We've been trying to do it for 30 years, and we've had different programs in Washington. We've tried to reach out to legislators and whatnot, and they get it, but the message just doesn't quite get out to the general public as it should.
But it also means that we need to be more transparent. And from some people I hear that we don't want to be more transparent in the shipping industry.
I'm not sure transparent in what way. As far as our business goes, yes, okay.
So that might be one of the reasons why we never get so far with our message about shipping.
Most of the time, though, however, and again, this is in large part our industry's fault, we make the news only when bad things happen. And so for any industry to get on the front page of the New York Times for a good thing doesn't happen very often. In fact, it doesn't happen at all, regrettably. But at least if we can start some sort of a public affairs outreach program, maybe we get on the second front page of the New York Times. A good article about progressive environmental programs that are underway by a number of companies. Things like my member, which is Tote Services and Tote Maritime, with their LNG projects. To publicize that we are an industry, we're an important industry to every citizen of the world, and that we are trying very hard to move ourselves forward to be environmentally progressive. I don't have to tell you, Maersk Lines is probably one of the greatest, and they do a great outreach program. But most shipping companies are not the size of Maersk Lines. They don't have the resources, both financial and human, to do the kinds of outreach that Maersk does. But it's that kind of program the industry in general needs.
Yeah, I agree. And we need to pool up, I think, then. Because all the small ones need to pool together and do this. Or maybe it's the international organizations. I don't know where it should start.
Well, I think that's one possible resource. We are a founding member of the International Chamber of Shipping, which is one of the international associations that cover global shipping. BEMCO, which is another association that actually has individual ship owners as members. And the ICS, National Shipowner Associations, are members. There's also CLIA, which is the cruise lines. And of course, the cruise lines have got a lot of resources because they have to sell cruises, and most people are environmentally sensitive, and so they have to, that's their product, green shipping. There are other organizations as well, Intertanko, Independent Tanker Owners Association, Intercargo, which covers the bulkers market. It may well be that some sort of coalition of these international organizations could plan to do what we need to have done, which is a great outreach public affairs program.
I think you're right there, because I can't see every individual ship owner finding the time or the money to do this.
Well, to some degree, every ship owner has to do it with its customers.
Yes, of course.
But I think we're talking about a bigger outreach program. We're really talking about how to get the message out to the general public that the shipping industry is important, it's relevant, it's environmentally responsible, and we're here to serve. That's the message we need to get out. We're not asking people to protest on our behalf or anything. We're just asking them to become aware of what we do and how we do it.
And we want to reach the next generation.
Absolutely.
We've got some really interesting jobs coming. I mean, the technology now developing. I mean, we're old-fashioned, but our technology is so forward.
Yes.
And I think that will appeal to young people if we just get the message out.
Well, and there's a number, particularly in Europe, because I recall someone telling me, it was a captain, an Italian captain on one of the chemical carriers, that unlike the United States at the time, to become a professional mariner was right up there with becoming a doctor and a lawyer. It was an esteemed profession. In the U.S., I think it's an esteemed profession, but most of the general public doesn't because they don't know what it is that we do. So I think outreach to the educational institutions, the maritime educational institutions, to non-maritime educational institutions, because we're still going to need the information technology experts, the business experts. A good shipping company is something more than just people that drive ships around. It's people ashore that work with the people on board to economically and efficiently move that ship from point A to point B, with the benefit of making money on that, but providing a very important service to the people that are receiving the product. So we need people all across the skill set a company needs: human resources, business management, accounting, training. All those are very, very important, plus the mariner.
With all the technology coming now, for instance, they're talking about autonomous ships and remote control ships and things like that. That is a little bit more into digitalization and that. Do we need new kinds of education? Do we need to change the education system to also include more of these new things happening on the ships?
Well, I think most of the educational systems have done a pretty good job at integrating developing technology into the curriculum. I can tell you, back when I was sailing on ships, it really looked like a ship. It had an engine room telegraph, a couple of them. It had a big wheel, which was the wheel you never used, a small wheel, which was electronic steering, a couple radars, a couple navigational systems, and now, if you look at the bridge of a ship, it looks like the space shuttle, which is not a bad thing. Technology is great, but one of the things that we found is to remember the human being is using that technology as a tool, or should be. And I was just talking to a colleague earlier, what we have to remind our youth is there are still windows on the bridge of a ship. And no matter how many screens you have, get your head out of your screen and look outside. Because far and away, the human mind, observing the real environment, is far superior than the human mind having to look at 4 screens with a lot of information. So I think, the educational systems need to continue to develop to teach people how to deal with so much input, screen out the stuff that's not important, and use the stuff that is, but to go back to the old ways of navigation, which is look out the window.
Yeah. We should do that also on shore, I think.
I think so. Indeed, yeah. Now, I will say this much. I remember when I sailed, is you stood a watch. There was one chair, or maybe 2 chairs on the bridge, one on the port side, one on the starboard side. That chair was for the captain when he was on the bridge. Now, I would suspect that some watchmates, after the captain's gone to bed, probably enjoyed a sit or 2 on that chair. But if the captain caught you, you'd be lucky not to be thrown overboard. I say that in jest. Now, many ships that I've seen, you actually sit the watch because you're built up on a console. You can see the windows. You've got all your screens in front of you. And that's where I'm old enough to have to pull myself into the new day. It's certainly a way forward. It's great information, but it's a tool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you have any role models?
Well, the obvious was my mother and my father, because I grew up in a very nurturing environment, an environment that taught me there was anything I wanted to do that I could plan a way forward and achieve it with work. Role models in the maritime industry, I would have to say, at least in my early sailing days, was a gentleman named Captain John Bates, who was the head of the Marine Department that I worked for. And quite frankly, most recently, Joe Cox, who's the retired president of the International Chamber of Shipping. Joe taught me everything I know about the Chamber of Shipping in Washington and dealing with that level of the industry. There's others. There's many, many more people that I've been so lucky to have in my life, even if they touch it for only a few moments, that everybody is a source of knowledge. Everybody may not agree with you. Everybody may not particularly like you, but there's something to be learned from all those situations. That's the approach that I think my mom and dad taught me, and it's served me okay so far.
Who do you think I should meet the next time? Who do you think I should interview?
Ooh, that was a question out of that. Let's see. I think a nice interview would be my colleague, Sean Klein. Sean is about 25 years younger than I am. He's obviously male, and it might be interesting to get his perspective on many of the questions you've asked me, and then we can do a side-by-side and see how the new guys versus the old girls compare.
Well, I might end up in trouble if I do that, and then you will compare and you will say, "Oh."
No, not at all. I think, like I said, any scenario I've been in is always a learning experience. Might be interesting. Sean would be a possibility. Trying to think who might be at the conference right now that would be a good tag.
You can say anyone. I'm not sure if I can make it, but anyone you think the world should listen to.
Honestly, you might as well go for the top. How about the IMO Secretary General? I'll tell you who would be a good person. IMO Secretary General is not here, and that might be a hard interview. Peter Hinchcliffe from the International Chamber of Shipping. Peter is an ex-Royal Navy submariner. So he spent more of his time under the water than on it, but he's a most interesting man. He's very smart, and he really understands the international industry. And while our ages are not that much different, I don't believe, he provides a wonderful perspective. And if I think of anyone else,
you'll let me know.
I'll let you know.
Thank you very much for your time, Kathy.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It's an honor.
Wasn't that great? I wonder if I've got the answer now to how we could spread the word about shipping. It's a Madison Avenue campaign, pulled up by all the international organizations. We'll see if that will happen. Meanwhile, I will continue my little crusade here on my own. This was the 41st episode. 20 of those 41 are actually women in shipping being interviewed. That is very close to 50%. Something we hardly see when it comes to maritime conferences or keynote speakers or anything like that. I think it's something to take into consideration. Have you signed up for the newsletter yet? I told you in the last episode that I have now finally got down to putting together a monthly newspaper. I think you should sign up. You do that on the website shippingpodcast.com. I have moved the subscription button up a bit, so now it's just below the current episode that you are listening to. You can't miss it now. The newsletter is free. That's usually something you like. It's monthly, so it doesn't come too often. It highlights previous episodes so far. I'm trying to get them in bunches that is matching each other. So the newsletter for August was focused on digital. Digital transformation. How do we become more digital? Why is it important that we know all these different things? And how is that paradigm going to happen? Sign up, and I promise you, you won't be disappointed. Thank you for listening. Until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast where the maritime professionals are talking about their everyday job.